Okay, so we're gathering some first answers. I can see planning, forecasting, simulation, design. So as we will see in a few moments, there is a bit of vocabulary maybe to explain and to clarify. Is it about predicting the future? Is it about making projections, about making some forecasts, or more projecting based on hypotheses and simulating different scenario? So I can see a lot of those words. Then we have answers on short-term versus long-term projection. So there is indeed a question of what is the time horizon for this modeling exercise. I can see exploring futures with not only one future, but indeed exploring different possible futures, designing, maybe it's about designing policies based on those scenario and modeling exercise. For energy transition, so likewise, what's the end goal of modeling? Are we just doing modeling for the pleasure of playing with Excel or more complex tools, or is it for a more concrete purpose? So it can be indeed to inform the policies and to support energy transitions. Okay, thank you very much for all those answers. Moving to another question. In your opinion, when we start considering an energy modeling exercise, when we what are the starting elements really that will structure the development of an energy model? Would that be, and you can strongly agree or disagree with the below proposal, are the starting points really about the model objective, the quality of the data, the predictable political trajectories, the assumptions we'll take, or timeliness of the input data, for example? Okay, so I can see that the model objective is ranking pretty high. And indeed, as we will discuss, a model is just one tool which is here to answer specific questions. So we need to be very clear on what we want to get out of the model, and to be clear on what question should be answered. I see that data are also rating high. Indeed, this model will be based on input data and their quality, their reliability, their granularity, and timeliness of this data will be of prime importance. Assumptions will also be very key, and we will need to make them transparent and very clear. Political trajectories are also something very important, but maybe it relates more to the building of the scenario itself. So thank you for your answers. One more question. According to you, what's the main driver of future energy demand trends? So if energy demand is to rise in the future, is it due to technology development, to GDP growth, to population growth, to energy access, or to low carbon energy policies? So a lot of very interesting answer. This question is very context and country specific. If we were asking this question to countries such as Russia or Western Europe countries, we would where population is almost stable or not growing very fast, we would expect GDP to be the main driver of growth for energy. But in the context of sub-Saharan Africa and of Nigeria, I agree with you that population growth will be the main driver of future energy demand trends. Energy access is also something which I think is very important, because as people are getting access to electricity and to modern cooking fuels, we also expect this to be linked to more socioeconomic development and the ability to have higher incomes, to have more purchasing power, and to have the ability to get more equipment to climb the energy ladder and to be able to consume more energy. So in the specific context of Africa, I think indeed that population growth is the key driver, GDP, of course, and is the case everywhere, energy access too, and as you also mentioned, technology development, energy policies can also impact a lot, of course, how energy demand will evolve in the future. One last question before moving to the session itself. If we look at the transport sector and trying to see what would be the variable that we need to look at when we do a model and when we try to see how energy demand will evolve in passenger road transport. So what would be the most important variables? Would that be passenger kilometer? And we will discuss later on what it exactly means. Would that be the number of cars on the roads? Would that be the average distance traveled per car? Or would that be the number of passengers per car? Okay, so you're mostly voting for the number of cars more than for other variables. So there is no bad or good answer here. All those variables will be impacting the energy demand in passenger roads transport. Passenger kilometer is an aggregated indicator that we will discuss to reflect all the below variables. Of course, the more cars in the country, the more energy consumed we expect. But this depends on how much kilometers each car will drive. This depends on what the fuel consumption of one car and then what the efficiency level. But then it also depends on the number of passenger per car, because if all Nigerians want to travel, let's say for Ada move 100 kilometers to go to visit family. If you have cars that can only take 3 people, or if you have cars or just mini buses or whatever who can welcome 5 people, it will not be the same energy consumption, because this car sharing variable would impact on the energy consumed to move the car itself. So just to invite you to think of when we say transport, there is the final need, which is what do people want? People want to move. And then there are many questions on how many people will there be in one car, how many kilometers one car will travel, how much fuel one car will use. And all these questions will help us understand what will be the consequences for the energy sector in terms of diesel or gasoline consumption for passenger road transport. So I'm stopping here those questions. We'll come back later on more Menti questions. So just today, we'll discuss general principles on energy modeling and how to build energy or modeling scenario. We'll discuss demand, then we'll break for questions and answer. Then we'll discuss modeling of power sector refineries, which are the transformation processes in our energy system. And last, we'll discuss a bit of supply modeling, primary energy supply and hydrocarbon upstream sector. So starting here with the first general principles. In this section, we will discuss some general principles on energy modeling and on how to build scenarios. So, as we all know, the energy sector is at the heart of our societies, and it is very linked to our climate and to our environment. There is no energy island, which means that what will happen in one country matters for the rest of the world, and what will happen in one sector has impact in other sectors. Stakeholders in the energy space are interested in understanding better the trends and the potential futures, but also to understand the possible technologies and fuel options, which each have advantages and disadvantages. So how can energy modeling and energy scenario help? Well, first, they can bring an integrated view of different key driving forces in a holistic, consistent, and disciplined way. Second, energy modeling and scenario enable to explore alternative futures and deal with uncertainties, for example, providing sensitivities analysis. And third, modeling and scenario help understanding how different technological options can meet the requirements. There is no ideal model. A model is a tool which is built to answer a specific answer. So each model has strengths and weaknesses. At the IEA, our models are deeply rooted into techno-economic assessment, and we will present in the coming slides more details on our energy models. We need to define our approach towards the future and to discuss a bit terminology. So when we consider the future, we can try to predict what will happen in any case, but this is about prophecy. What we do under energy modeling is to try to predict what happens if some conditions are met, and then we are exploring scenario, we are forecasting and foreseeing, but we can also try to investigate what should happen for a certain objective to be met. For example, if we want universal access to clean cooking and electricity to be reached by 2030, what would be the optimum trajectory by that date? When we design energy models, we need first to ask ourselves, what is the objective of this model? What is its scope, and what will be its different features? And as a start, looking at historical data is fundamental because the level of details available will define how reliable and accurate the model will be. Then there are questions on coverage, what sector, what geographical areas, what type of fuels we want to take into account in the energy model. In terms of approach and techniques, there are different. We will present them in the coming slides. We can also integrate specific features like endogenous technological learning, where, for example, we will say that the cost of a given technology, for example, solar PV, would decrease over time as the deployment of this technology increases. We can also include macroeconomic feedback, for example, in an oil producer country. If we take assumptions on the exports of oil, this might have impact on the GDP of the country. And GDP is usually an input information, as we will discuss later on. So this can impact the entire energy model. But the design of the model will very much rely on drawing a line between what is exogenous and what is endogenous. And we will never insist enough on that. Data requirements will totally depend on the model design and will strongly impact the model. We cannot do projection, we cannot look at the future if we don't have statistics and data that enable us to understand the present and to understand the past and where we come from. How can we make projections on the future of energy demand? There are two main methodologies, and the first approach is on end use. It's a bottom-up or an engineering approach. Here, the idea is to use a physical relationship between energy and the end-use devices, the processes, the services. Let's take an example. If we want to estimate what will be the demand for electricity in the residential sector in 10 years, we could disaggregate the residential sector, look at each and every need household would have. For example, there is a need for lighting, for cooking, for powering some appliances. So we would look sector by sector, what are the needs, what is the final energy demand, what are the devices that will provide those services. So there would be different type of lighting bulbs, LEDs, what will be the consumption of each of those devices, and we will be able to get a number of the electricity demand for this sector. So this approach is highly disaggregated and it enables very precise analysis. Although it's complex and data consuming, it is very appropriate for the midterm and the long term. Another approach for estimating future energy demand is to look at econometric established relations, for example, between energy demand and economic variables. Again, if we want to estimate the future electricity demand in the residential sector, we could try to look what is the level today and to see how it's linked to the GDP per capita. And if we look at the evolution of the GDP per capita, we could try to estimate what will be the evolution of electricity demand. And this will be based on established relationships between those two variables based in the past, based in other regions and comparable countries. So this type of approach is made at a very aggregated level. It's not made at the end use level, so it's simpler, but it is less accurate. This approach is very appropriate for the short term. When we want to project and to estimate what the future of energy supply could be, again, there are two methodologies. The first one is about optimization. We ensure minimizing a variable under like cost and ensuring that it meets all the constraints. So it can be having a level of electricity produced at the lower cost, having an electricity mix at the lower emission factor. Another methodology is about simulation, where we will simulate behaviors of both energy consumers and energy producers. For example, we will take one signal that would be price of the oil barrel, and see, depending on the price, how much oil consumer will ask for and how much oil producer will be able to bring to the market. And then you do iterations to find an equilibrium between consumption and production. On this slide, we are trying to recap a mapping of those different energy models and approaches. So as we said, you can be under a deductive approach and do some forecasting. So what the future is likely to look like given a set of assumptions. So if we have these policies, if we continue with this type of technology, what would the future look like? And on the right end of the slide, you can see another approach, which is strategic planning. So this is a normative methodology where we will set an objective, universal access to electricity, reduction of CO2 emissions as per our climate agreement, and we will try to deduct and backcast what would be the pathway to get there. Then, in terms of modeling methodology, as we say, there are bottom-up methodologies and top-down. There are many different models and existing tools to do energy modeling. At the IEA, we use what we call the World Energy Model that we will present into more details. Energy modeling relies on scenario. And to build a scenario, it is needed to develop sets of policies that will describe different future pathways. Creating a coherent storyline among policy, prices, deployment, and development of energy sources and technologies are important, and it is needed to ensure that all that makes sense together. At the International Energy Agency, the flagship publication World Energy Outlook relies on two main scenarios. The first one is the stated policy scenario, or STEPS, which holds up a mirror to the actions and the intentions of today's policymakers. In other words, it is a deductive approach where we provide a candid assessment of what would happen if those policy actions and intentions are implemented, and what will be the implication for energy markets, for energy security, for emissions. Another scenario, which comes from a normative approach, is the sustainable development scenario. It provides a strategic pathway to meet global climate goals, air quality, and energy access in full. So here the idea is to say what shall be the pathway if we want to have universal access by 2030, if we want to be aligned with our climate and air quality goals. But we can also develop ad hoc analyses, cases, sensitivities, and in the case of Africa, in 2019, the World Energy Outlook presented the Africa case, which includes as targets the Agenda 2063 of Africa Union goals for inclusive and sustainable socioeconomic growth, in addition to universal access to both electricity and clean cooking, and to improvement of air quality. This is a simplified chart of the International Energy Agency World Energy Model, or WEM, and we will come to this slide many times in the coming sessions and the coming trainings. You can see on the top part of the chart some green arrows, which are the input assumptions. On the bottom part, you have the output with orange arrows, including energy flows, so the energy balances, associated CO2 emissions, and investment required to have those energy systems. And the heart of the modeling, of the energy modeling tool itself, is broken down into different subsections. So going from the right to the left, on the right, we have the final energy demand sectors, industry, transport, buildings, agriculture, and we will look at the services which require energy and the end use demand. Left to that, we will deduct the transformation processes, refinery, power sector, and the primary energy demand related to that. So oil, oil demand, coal, gas, but also resources for power generation. On the top left side, you have the supply modeling section with fossil fuel supply, but very importantly as well, trade matrices, import, export of oil, of gas, as well as domestic production. And the fossil fuel prices will play a role of equilibrium between supply and demand. Developing models requires to take assumptions. And at the IEA, our modeling exercises rely on various set of data, including IEA internal statistics and research, as well as external data available. When it comes to cost, it is very important to have
regular peer review of the hypothesis, because costs can evolve very, very quickly and be outdated very, very quickly. At the IEA, all our main assumptions are made publicly available and transparent in our website and in our publication. And what ensures the robustness and the seriousness of our work is that each and every report is peer reviewed by many experts from different sectors, from different sources and regions. In the model, the input includes exogenous assumptions. And those assumptions are related to socioeconomic drivers, like how population will evolve in the future, how GDP is to evolve. So we can rely on other institutions' predictions, like IMF, or make our own predictions. Then we will take as exogenous assumption the policies that government would take, for example, energy policies in the renewable space, with targets that could be fixed by government, with standards that would be implemented, or support measure to certain energy technologies, energy access targets, subsidies removal rates that will also help the assumption and be input to the model. Technology assumptions are key as well, including investment, efficiency of the technology, cost of the capital for deploying those technologies, as well as assumptions on infrastructure development. How long does it take to develop a hydropower dam, for example? In this section, we will present energy demand modeling, starting with general principles and then illustrating with industry, transport, and building sectors. Coming back to our simplified chart of the world energy model, we are on the right part, so looking at final energy demand that will enable us to understand transformation processes in the second step. So what do we want to do in the demand side modeling modules of the world energy outlook? We are building on a bottom-up modeling of the energy sector, and this is done for 25 regions of the world, encompassing power, heat, and other transformation, and looking at the final sectors, which are industry, transport, buildings, and others. The objective is to get an explicit idea of the sector and the technology specific parameters, which would be specific to each region and country as well. We want to know about stocks of equipments, future capacities and future sales of such equipment, lifetime of each unity, each equipment, cost and related efficiencies. And this applies to the car fleet in a country, but also to the power plant, where we'd like to understand again stock, future capacity, and features of each of those plants. Each and every module of the demand modeling are structured in the same way. The question we want to answer is what will be the final energy demand coming from transport, from industry, from agriculture? And to answer this question, we need to ask ourselves what is the real demand for energy services? So, what is the requested useful energy? And what will be the technologies, the fuels, the equipment that will meet these, that will provide these services? Sometimes it's not easy to have estimation of how the demand for energy services will evolve. So we need to define some drivers to make those estimations. So let's take an example on residential sector. If we want to estimate how the demand for electricity in the residential sector will evolve, we can look at one specific topic that would be lighting. And the question is, how will households want to get lighting services in the future? We may know what is the demand today for electricity for lighting houses, but we don't know very well how this will evolve. So we can try, based on econometric analysis, to estimate this. And a driver that could be a good indication of lighting services could be the, the square meters per capita. And here, again, based on econometric analysis, we can try to project how the square meter per capita will evolve in a certain country, maybe function of the GDP per capita, and assuming that we know how the GDP per capita is projected to evolve based on projections from socioeconomic analysis, we can estimate how the square meter per capita will evolve. And then, based on what we observed in the past, what we observe in similar countries, we can estimate how the demand for lighting will evolve for all those houses, for all those meters per capita. From there, we'll be able to anticipate how demand for lighting will increase and to understand what is the part of this demand which is provided by existing technologies, how those equipments like the existing light bulbs will last, and there will be a retirement of those old technologies. So if we want to meet the new demand, we have a need for new equipments, and based on a cost-based approach, we will be estimating what type of technology will be deployed. For example, for the lighting need, we could have super efficient LED as well as more basic light bulbs. And based on economic analysis, we can estimate what will be the share of super efficient LED that will be bought by people and what will be the share of more basic lighting bulbs. Each of those technologies, so this diverse portfolio of technology, has for each different efficiency levels. So we will be able to convert this need for useful energy into a need for final energy based on the efficiency of each equipment. Different strategies will be implied for different sectors. Here, if we look at the sustainable development scenario, we can see how total final consumption would evolve by sector and by fuel. And we can see that in the transport sector, there is a sharp decline in the total final consumption that also leads to a decline in the CO2 emissions, but we don't have such evolution in industry and buildings. One reason that would be that due to the expansion of electricity access, the total final consumption in building is not decreasing. So in each end-use sector module, the questions we want to answer is what will be the need for new equipments in the future? And this requires to ask the first question, which is what is the end-use demand in the future? Then how much equipment needs to be replaced, how much new equipment we will need. And to do that, we are asking ourselves which are the technologies chosen to meet the estimated end-use demand, and what is the influence of energy policies. In our case of lighting, we could try to estimate what if the government puts standards which provide from importing very basic lighting bulbs, but really supports the deployment of super efficient LED. This would have an impact in our exercise of allocating the different technologies to meet the end use needs. And another question we want to answer is what will be the associated and the resulting final energy demand and the associated CO2 emissions and investment. Now we will very quickly illustrate this on the industry sector. So the industry demand model is disaggregated per sector. So we will have different industrial sector, aluminium, cement, etc. And in our model, we will, as usual, have as inputs socioeconomic drivers like GDP, population, but also historic production of industry products and end-use energy prices. In terms of activity variable, we will take into consideration physical production. So if we want to estimate the future energy demand from the cement industry, we might take as a variable the tons of cement which will be produced in the future and deduct from the tons of cement what would be the energy demand. For some sectors where we don't have a physical production, we can look at the value added of this specific industry. This is an example of results that we can get in our analysis looking at Africa industry. Here you can see 4 countries with 2018 levels of demand on cement and on steel in 2018 and in 2040 according to our projections. And we have also compared these levels to those of India in 2018. So steel and cement demand per capita is one example of parameter we will project so that we get a better understanding of what could be the total energy demand coming from the industry. And the interesting part of the analysis is that we are able also to look at what would be the share of imports and the share of domestic production. Another analysis that we are bringing to your attention in the industry sector is about motors, because most of the energy demand in the industry sector comes from motor-driven system, and this is where efficiency matters a lot because there is a high potential with efficiency measures to decrease the energy demand in the industry sector, looking at the efficiency of motors. Moving to the transport sector. So when it comes to transport, we again need to disaggregate. So we know that there is transport on roads, aviation, rail, navigation. So this will be our disaggregated subsectors. And we will look for activity variables that will depend on whether we're looking at passengers or goods. As usual, we have social economic indicators as input of the model, including population, GDP, and historical data. So as discussed, the activity variable we will rely on are passenger kilometers, which is basically an aggregated indicator of vehicle fleet, distance traveled on average by one car, and occupation rates, so number of people in one car. And this number will be a good indication of the intensity of how much people want to travel on the road with cars. We will have the same type of indicator with goods on ton kilometers, where we will multiply vehicle fleet by distance traveled by load factor or quantity of good in the trucks. Again, if we look at one analysis we have done on the future of Africa transport, we can focus on evolution of vehicle ownership, and here we have made projections on the level of cars and two and three wheelers owned by thousands of people in Africa. The key message is that it is expected to grow very fast, to grow further in the Africa case scenario. And you have countries like Ghana, where the number of two and three wheelers per thousand people is expected to triple. We also need to remember that this is per thousand people and the population itself will grow. So there is expectation of much more cars, much more two, three wheelers in the roads in Africa in the coming decades. Another result of our outlook exercise on the Africa transport is based on evolution of the car fleet, based on evolution of passenger kilometers indicators, of ton kilometers indicators, we can have an estimation on how total energy demand for the transport sector will evolve. So starting in 2018, we see that there is a breakdown where road passenger makes the bulk of the energy demand. By 2030, this is expected to grow, and the difference between our stated policy scenario and the Africa case is due to a higher GDP. That means more economic development, more cars in the roads, more trucks in the roads. Looking ahead to 2040, we can see that higher GDP again increases the demand for transport, but efficiency gain contributes to limit the growth. So again, there is a strong case for efficiency measures that can limit the growth of economic of energy demand. Looking now at the building sector, so building is an aggregation of residential and services sector, where again we will have to segment and disaggregate by the type of energy need we are looking at. So we know that in buildings we are looking for space cooling, water heating, we are looking for energy for cooking, for lighting, for powering appliances. Here, the activity variables we will look at are floor space, so square meter per capita, number of households, appliances ownership, how many TV or how many phones does a household have on average, and we can also rely on services added value. As usual, our input data will be socioeconomic drivers, but also building specific indicators like urbanization or dwelling occupancy. One result at a global level is that under the stated policy scenario, we see that there would be an increase of almost all fuels to meet the needs in buildings because buildings are requiring electricity for lighting, for example, but also oil products, LPG for cooking, for instance, but it can also be heat, gas for cooking, etc. We can see that this is a totally different story if we are under our sustainable development scenario at the global level, where CO2 emissions coming from the building sector are expected to decrease, and we will see an increasing share of electricity as the main fuel providing the energy services for the building sector. One key analysis specific to Africa about cooling. As you may know, today there are 700 million people who need cooling services in Africa today because they live in places where the average temperature every day does never go below 25 degrees. In 2040, this number will rise to 1.2 billion because of population growth and because of global warming. Today, the equipment in air conditioner, fans is very low, but with middle class rising and with population growth and urbanization, we expect that the demand for cooling services will increase a lot by 2040, and this will translate into a demand for electricity in the building sector. Still, if some efficiency measures are implemented, there is a potential to divide by two this increase in the electricity demand. For example, implementing standards to import the most advanced air conditioner and the most efficient fans.
Okay, so now we'll take a break for questions that you may have on what was just presented. Um, so as you usually do, you can use the Q&A box or directly raise your hand if you want to speak, to comment, or to ask any clarification question. And while you make note down your question, I'm just sharing one more slide, which is an extract from the Nigeria energy outlook we conducted 2 years ago. You are now familiar, I think, with the stated policies or steps scenario, looking where the current and announced policies bring us, versus the Africa case scenario, which takes into account universal access to electricity, to clean cooking, as well as more dynamic and inclusive GDP growth. And what you can see for the case of Nigeria is that the outlook would be very different, because in the case of in the Africa case, we have a lower primary energy demand, but which is fueling a higher GDP, and this comes from people moving away from the traditional use of biomass and moving to more modern, more efficient fuels for cooking, such as LPG. This comes from more energy efficiency in cars, in all appliances like lighting bulbs in the offices and in the houses, and in the industry, more efficiency as well. So just to show an example specific to Nigeria. So I know that several people in this meeting have been developing energy model for Nigeria. So I'd be very happy to hear from you if what was presented resonates with what you've been working on, or if you have developed other or complementary approaches to energy modeling. That would be very interested to hear from you in case you don't have direct questions, but just want to provide some insights. Okay, excellent. We have two participants who raised their hand. I'm promoting them panelists so that they can speak. Uh, Sorry, you might face a bit of delay. Okay, can you speak now?
Hello?
Hello, yes, Aminu Haruna, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Here in Nigeria, Energy Commission of Nigeria is overlooking the energy system in all its ramifications. We're looking at the electricity, we're looking at fossil fuels, the use of transport, and the use in the transport sector, in the industry. So we are at the advantage of looking at the energy in totality. One of our activities actually modeling the energy country system. And then we have a set of tools we've been using. We have the model for, we have some analytical modeling tools from IEA. And then currently we're using one from the British government. That is the Energy Calculator 2050. So all of them are actually giving us a good insight, like just what you presented. Most of the parameters are almost the same. But most of the activities, for example, that of the IEA tools, the model for the analysis of energy demand, as well as model for energy supply strategy and the environmental impacts. These two tools, one of them, the model for the analysis is actually on simulative base, while that of the supply is optimization based. And but the results are quite excellent, and they follow the same routes, just like the one you are using, the IEA stuff. So I think this training will be in line with what we are doing in Nigeria as well. But there will be greater impact. Our cases are basically on from the activities of the demand. They are basically on bottom-up approach, and then sometimes uh, we use the econometric so that we can have a robust outlook of the system and to project to simulate it to future. I think we're on the right course too. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thanks to you. May I ask you if you have developed some specific scenarios? Like here, we often refer to our stated policies and to another scenario which is more ambitious, which is the Africa case. Do you have developed such scenario, or maybe based on different assumptions, like different levels of the price for oil barrel, or different assumptions on GDP evolution in Nigeria? Have you played a bit with different assumptions and scenario?
Yeah, we have a set of scenarios, like three basically. We're looking at the government agenda of trying to be among the greater economies then by 2020, but now it's being shifted as well. So we have the business as usual scenario, which is uh, like we're looking at the economy, the GDP to be like 7%. And then we're also looking at if we go into double digit GDPs, like 10% and 11.5%. So we have this set of three scenarios. But on the 2050 calculator, that is the UK based, we're looking at the best options for carbon reduced activities. So we're targeting more on the carbon free scenarios.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting to hear about your scenario. I think indeed it resonates with the principles we explained. Like, we have a starting question: is it about trying to understand where the entire energy system is going, depending if economic and GDP growth are as usual, or medium, or very high level. And I understand that you have another scenario which is backcasting what needs to be done if we want to reach a certain level of decarbonization, of reduced emissions all across the energy sector. And indeed, so we are discussing a lot with our colleagues from International Atomic Energy Agency, who are providing these tools you just mentioned. So we are indeed liaising with them and coordinating. What we will aim to do under this intro webinar sessions, so this week and the next week, is really to work on Excel tools, which are a bit more accessible, but still to present some of the reasoning of modeling. So we won't be able to go as deep and as disaggregated and granular as you would do under the MAID IEA tool, but I think you will still be able to see a bit of the dynamic. So thanks a lot, Mr. Aminu Haruna, for your intervention. If there are, I see there are some questions. So on this Nigeria Energy Outlook just presented, this result from a work conducted in 2019. We consulted and we sent for peer review our draft work to Nigerian officials. I don't have in mind who concretely was consulted, but what is for sure is that maybe we did not have so many contacts and so good interactions as we have today with Nigeria. So if we were to renew this work and to develop a new Sub-Saharan Africa Energy Outlook, we would be very interested to work more with you and to co-build such work. As part of this capacity reinforcement program, we would like to develop whatever tools and models that would make sense to and that would match your needs. Since we are still working remotely, for now we are still under this virtual platform. But next step will be to come to you in Abuja or Lagos and to work with you, and we will have more direct collaboration. So this was trying to answer your question, Emmanuel Umo. Then a question on the WEM, the World Energy Model. Is it an optimization or a simulation model? It works it uses the two techniques. So it's using both optimization and simulation, depending on the sub model we are looking at. So it's a bit of an hybrid way, and it's also both bottom up and top-down econometric approaches, depending at the subsector or level we are working at. A question on a system dynamic based model to be used. I'm not perfectly understanding what you refer to as a system dynamic based model. I'm taking the question and asking to some colleagues who might have more insights on the different variety of model. And you can also ask, we can also keep this question when we'll discuss with our partners from academic work who are benchmarking and looking at all available model. Okay, so now I have just two more questions for you. So I invite you to go again to Menti. We are still under the same code, but I have a new question for those who joined us on board. It's the code to be used on www.menti.com is 71189943. And it's a question of understanding concretely. We had this great intervention from Mr. Aminu Haruna, but maybe others have been working on other production tools. So just asking you again, very quickly, if you want to list again those tools you've been using. Maybe it's Excel, maybe it's the MAD that has been mentioned, but just interested to have again a mapping of the tools you've been using. Okay, so thank you for your answers. A lot of Excel, which is good because this is what we will use together, and it enables to do already many things. Other interesting tools, so MAD, Leap, um, Osmosis. So it will be great to have the coming session with colleagues from Imperial College who have developed this Osmosis or who are part of the group working on this Osmosis tool. I see Python, which is indeed a language, a coding language. There is a question in the Q&A box, which is for energy modeling, is there a need for programming like Python or any other? So Python is a coding language, or it can help treat faster some large amount of data, such as having SQL request, but then it's not mandatory to master such programming code. It all depends on the level of granularity, but of course, the more detailed and developed data set you have, the more you will need either to have large computing capacities like fast computers with a lot of bandwidth, or you will need to have some coding and some coding ability to faster the calculation you want to do. Okay, thank you for your answers. Another one in the same idea, which relates to the time horizon. When you do projection, when you look at the future, what time horizon do you consider? Is it short term, like under 5 years? Is it 5 to 10, 10 to 20, or is it really long term? You're looking at what Nigeria energy system will look like in 2050, for example. Okay, so I see answers are mostly short to medium term. Here, one key impact of this time horizon is how do you calibrate your model? If you're looking ahead 2030, maybe you will want to look with a 1 year time period how your energy system is evolving. So when you get your results, you will really compare year per year what the results are. If you are looking at 2040 or 2050, maybe you would just rely on 5 years time slots, looking what the results of your model are in 2025, 2030, 2035, and playing at this level of time period rather than at a 1 year period. So, okay, very interesting. Thank you for your answer. One question that we will be discussed in the coming video is on energy prices and their role in energy modeling. So, according to you, what are they useful for in a modeling exercise? Are energy prices useful for determining affordability for households, determining trade, to determine refinery capacity, estimate investment, or are they used as a balance between supply and demand? Okay, so very good answers. Indeed, the way we work is to use price as a balance between supply and demand, and this will be detailed in the coming slides. So this is more the way we really take into account price in the exercise. But of course, one consequence of price will be level of investment. This might more refer to the price or the cost of each technology, and also based on cost and prices for end users, we will be able to deduct consumptions by households based on their income, based on the level of affordability. But this is again a bit more about supply and demand. So excellent answers. Thank you. Thank you very much. And we will now discuss the transformation processes in the power sector, in the refinery, and then last we will discuss the supply of primary energy, and we will discuss more specifically hydrocarbons.
In this section, we will present the energy modeling for the power sector and the refineries, so for transformation processes. In our world energy model simplified chart, so we are at the central part looking at transformation for power generation, which is often associated with heat production, and looking at refinery. Power sector is very complex, and we will present more into details this slide in a dedicated sessions on modeling of power sector. But the two main questions we want to answer, looking at the future of the power sector, is what will be the new plants we need to add, and this is based on the existing stock of power plants and how they will evolve when they will be retired, and with the increase of the demand, so based on investment assumptions, on refurbishment of existing plants, we will be able to estimate what will be the need for new plants to be added. And the second quick key question we need to ask is what will be the merit order dispatch? So in other words, how we will be able to meet at each second energy demand and to have a match between electricity demand and electricity supply by operating the right plants in a power mix where we would have solar PV producing during the day and base load power plants that would be also available in the day, but also at the peak of the demand in the night. The question is, when do we need to give priority to this or that technology based on different factors that would be cost, that would be CO2, etc. When it comes to integrating renewables into the electricity mix, there is some modeling to be done as well, looking at the potential of renewable energies, solar PV, wind, etc., and looking at the cost as well. So this will enable us to have a calculation on deployment of renewable energy and to estimate the needs for investment. What we observe is that decreasing cost and policy support are really bringing down the cost of renewables and are really bringing higher and higher the shares of renewable in most countries with important competitiveness. Let's have a look at one result of our modeling exercise on the African power sector, where on the left part you can see demand for electricity in Africa, and on the right part you can see how this demand is supplied, is provided by the electricity generation sources. So today, most of the electricity demanded in Africa is for productive uses, industry, agriculture, and there is also a significant part for households, and it's provided by sources which are gas, solar PV, hydro, and other sources for electricity generation. Based on our modeling, which comes from the demand sector, so how will evolve the demand in the building sector, in the industry sector, in the transport sector, we will have estimation of the future need for electricity. And here you can see that there is an important increase of productive electricity for productive uses for households which are already connected to the electricity today and that will have more appliances or more electricity needs, but also there will be a new demand from households who are not connected today and who will gain access to electricity. And the mix for generating this electricity will also evolve with an important role for gas, but the big winners will be modern renewables, specifically solar PV, who is expected to grow very fast. Another module into the transformation step of our world energy model is the refining model. And this model is really the link between oil demand. So for example, demand for oil products in transport, gasoline, diesel, other LPG and other products, and oil supply that will be crude oil, and refining is the intermediate between the two. So we will have to look, as we always do, at the demand category of product per category, kerosene, LPG, gasoline, etc. We will have to look at the demand for refined product, how those refineries are operated, what are the runs of those refineries, and then, as there is a lot of trade for oil products and for crude oil, we will have to balance region per region how the exchanges will happen between local and domestic production, import, exports from different regions. So if you try to look at what the results of our outlook would be for the oil sector, we can see that we expect oil production, so crude oil production in Africa, to be stable, while demand for oil, which derives from demand from oil products, is expected to increase. So considering the evolution of refinery runs, so how much crude oil will be converted into oil products, we can deduct what will be the expected net product imports, and this gives a very good indication of dependency on imports. In this section, we will describe energy modeling for the supply side. Coming back to our simplified chart of the world energy model, we are now looking at the left part, the supply of energy model. And we will see that fossil fuel prices have a key role. So the fossil fuel supply models are typically containing three models: oil, natural gas, and coal, even though oil and gas model are interlinked via natural gas liquids. The oil supply model is at a global level where supply and demand are in balance, whereas natural gas and coal, which are usually more domestically or regionally traded energies, are considered at regional level. For in the case of natural gas, there are some infrastructure which are like pipelines that determine where a certain production will be consumed, but we observe with LNG that natural gas is increasingly a global resource. To run those fossil fuel supply modules, there are many iterations between supply and demand, and price play a key role. And as you will see, there are different typologies and types of oil and gas. So prices play a key role of equilibrium in the world energy model because it is based on the idea that fossil fuel prices reflect levels which are sufficient for investment, but also to meet demand. So prices are at a level that makes that consumers can afford getting those resources, but at a level which is high enough that producer, so countries, companies, and investors can actually produce this resource and have economic return on their investment. So in this exercise, prices are derived through iterative modeling, and their trajectories are smooth and linear, even though we know that in reality, prices of oil, for example, are very, very volatile. We could have a more volatile and a less smooth trajectory, but this is not the goal of this modeling exercise, where we want to have long-term trajectories. So, for example, if we look at different projections of the price of crude oil, we see that under current policy or stated policy scenario, there is an increase of the price of oil barrel. And the main idea is that under the scenario, demand for oil is expected to grow, so the resources to be developed will be more and more costly. So this will be reflected in the price proposed by producers to consumers. In the case of the sustainable development scenario, we expect a decrease in demand for oil products. So there is also derived from that an expectation that the cost of production of the resource developed will be the lowest one, and on average, the crude oil price is expected to decline. One key specificity to the oil and gas sector is that, contrary to the power sector, you cannot switch on and switch off a plant upon request. When you have an existing field producing oil or producing gas, this specific field has a profile of production. And if we look today at how the supply and the production of oil meets the demand. And if we look in the future, we can see that under our stated policy demand scenario, we expect demand for oil to increase slightly or remain stable. But the existing production of fields which are exploited today is to decrease naturally. So if we want to fill the gap and to continue meeting the demand, we need to invest in new fields. So one new investment will bring to the market additional resource, but this field will decrease over time, and this will be the case for all new fields. So there is a need to invest and to invest continuously to ensure that there is a match between demand and existing production. So there are calculations which are made at regional level to ensure that there is a match between demand for crude oil, refining capacity, and demand for oil products. Looking at one key output for Africa, here you can see the net income that can be made from oil and gas resources in the top 10 producers in the continent. What is striking is that there has been a high volatility of incomes over the last 2 decades, and if you link this to government expenditure, you can see that when the revenues went up, government expenditure went up at a rapid pace, but in case of decrease, it was more difficult for governments to decrease their expenditure. What can the future look like? So again, we need to make assumptions, to make different scenario. Under a stated policy scenario we did last year, we would expect to see, based on the prices and the levels of production, that the top 10 producers in Africa could go back to levels of revenues which are the average of the last decade. But under another scenario of faster energy transition, there would be less demand for oil and gas products, and then there might be less revenues for the key producers. To conclude, energy models are a framework which provide or enable analysis, but it is a simplified representation of the real world. And the level of detail, the level of accuracy of the model will depend on what question we want to answer and what are the data available. Energy systems modeling provide many inputs. It can provide an outline for different possible directions where the energy system would go depending on assumptions. It gives high-level examples of prices, consumption, emissions, and it can give to policymakers cost estimates. But it is a long-term and a continuous process. It involves expertise from many different disciplines, and it's mostly a framework to help think about the challenges which are faced by energy systems and the decisions that needs to be taken by policymakers. it is not about predicting the future. It's really about supporting decision making under uncertainties, under different assumptions.
So I hope these slides and presentation were helpful to really set the scene on what energy modeling is about, what it is not about, what it can do, what it can't. I would like to illustrate with a short Excel exercise that you have received and seen in the handbook we provided to you. In the meantime, you are, so I propose we take maybe 10 minutes that I go very quickly through the Excel. If you have any question on the Excel or on the presentation, again, feel free to raise your hand and we can take all the time required. We have still half an hour to discuss and to come to those points. So I will share the Excel file. I hope you can see it correctly. So here, the exercise was putting you in the shoes of someone working at the Ministry of Energy or Oil, or someone who is asked by the maybe the Commission on Energy to try to estimate what will be the future demand for oil for the transport sector. And here the idea is to try to get an understanding of what the trends will be on demand in order to be able to work on transformation processes. So what levels of activity refineries could or shall have depending on the goals, and what will be the imports of refined products to match this demand. We have made a lot of simplification because this is a very short Excel 50 lines model. So of course, reality is much more complex. For example, we assume that oil is exclusively consumed in transport. And we know in reality that oil is also used for power generation at central and plant level, or also at the level of backup diesel generator. We know that oil is consumed also in the agriculture. It can be also for non-transport uses. Then we also took the simplification that there is only one oil product, which is gasoline, but we know that it's much more complex and there are more. We also took the assumption that the only vehicle is cars, so there is no 2-3-wheelers, there is no buses, there is no trucks. We know it's not true, of course. And all those simplification are just a way to work at a first level of complexity or simplicity. But what we can do is to refine and to add those different layers to disaggregate more and more as we are progressing in our modeling exercise. What you are given are historical data, and I will never insist enough on the fact that we cannot do modeling if we don't rely on good historical data. And then we will try to make projections based on those historical data. Just to show the way the Excel file is structured, on columns we have the dates. You can only see milestones with 5 years, but of course, if we expand, you will get by using on those plus and minus buttons all the details. And then you are given some socioeconomic drivers like population. And here you are given both the historical data and the projections that you would take from other body which are expert and relevant to give you the population. So here, maybe it's a country which looks like more like Chad or Niger rather than Nigeria. We're just looking at the population. But let's take it as an example, or maybe let's consider it's a small state in Nigeria with today around 20 million people. and 350,000 cars on the roads. Then we also have the oil demand in the country. And again, we assume, we simplify that all the oil demand goes to those cars for people who want to move. We also have, based on maybe on a survey which has been conducted, that can be by the Ministry of Transport, how many kilometers each car travel on average, or maybe this comes from controls done every year for the cars, and that's enabled to collect data on their travel distance every year. And also, and this can also come from a survey, we have occupancy rate per car. So here it's on average 1.5 people per car. This might sound very low for the Niger context, for example, but again, it's an input data we have taken, and in that case, we put it as a hard-coded data in our exercise. So this was more on demand and drivers. Then looking at transformation, we have the activity of the refineries in the countries. So the quantity of oil products which are produced in kiloton oil equivalents. And we also have the imports of gasoline, because we are in a country where the refinery are not able to fully supply and satisfy the demand for gasoline. So the first question you were asked is, before looking ahead, let's try to understand better what the past trends have been. And let's look at the indicator we mentioned, which we call passenger kilometer, and which enables to give a good level of the intensity of how much people want to travel in this country. And you were asked to calculate passenger kilometer, which again is, if I go to the solution sheet, passenger kilometer is calculated as the total number of cars in the country multiplied by the distance each car travels and by the number of people per car. Then you just need to be aware of the units, because we want passenger kilometers in billion kilometers, and we had several units, so you need to make sure you convert correctly. So what we can see is that passenger kilometer was at 0.54 in the year 2000 and grew to a bit less than 3 in the year 2018. Okay, that's the first information. Question number 2 was about the average fuel consumption per car. So here is information about the efficiency of the fleet, which will enable us to understand better how much efficient and what are the performances of the cars in the country. And here again, we were given the total oil demand in the country, which is exclusively for those cars. We know how much cars they are, how many kilometers they run, so we can calculate. And again, we need to pay attention to the units. We can calculate how much fuel one car consumes to ride 1 kilometer. But having TOE equivalent per kilometer is not a very readable information. So we converted it into liters per 100 kilometers. Maybe it makes more sense to convert it to gallons per miles, to whatever units is most readable for you. But here we looking at liters per kilometers. We see that in the year 2000, on average in the country, one car was using 13 liters to drive 100 kilometers, and this has been reduced to 11 in the year 2018. So now we have some understanding of past trends. We can start looking ahead and making projections. And question 3 was about trying to project or to estimate how many cars there will be in the country in 2030 by 2030. There are many ways of doing such projections. We mentioned econometric approaches. We could indeed look, for example, at how the number of cars has evolved over past and take a business as usual approach projecting the same growth rate. We could say that the number of cars in a country is very much connected to the per capita income or connected to the GDP per household, and that as GDP are getting more, they would start getting more equipments, including cars. So we could do many type of analysis. Here we have kept it very simple, and we have kept our parameters. So we say that passenger kilometer, which again is really the aggregated indicator reflecting the intensity of how much people want to move, we assume that this variable will grow at a 7% rate over time every year until 2030. And this 7% rate comes from what we have observed over the past years, because when we calculated passenger kilometer in historical parts, we can see that on average, if we take the latest 10 years, this variable has been growing by 7%. So we apply the same growth rate as what we saw. Then we also assume that we don't expect more people to be in one car on average, so it will be maintained at 1.5 person per car. And in terms of distance traveled per car, we were given some levels, and we could see that cars on average were traveling more and more. We will assume that on average, every car will travel 50 kilometers more every year. So these are our assumptions. And as a result, we can make the calculation because we have all the parameters. We know, sorry, it's not very readable. We know what the distance traveled per car is and will be. We know what the occupancy rate car is and will be. We know the passenger kilometer, so we can deduct the number of cars. And in that case, we would expect number of cars to go from 350,000 to 700,000 by 2030. So again, this is just one methodology based on several assumptions to project how the number of cars in this country will evolve. Then once that we have projections on number of cars, let's try to understand how much oil and oil products they will consume over time. And here we were given the average fuel consumption per 100 kilometer. What we can do is to take hypotheses on how the level of efficiency of engine will evolve. And here we assume that every year there will be a 1% efficiency. So we expect new vehicles to come to the market with better performances, so with lower needs for fuels to drive the same distance. And based on the projections we have on average fuel consumed per car, we can deduct what will be the total oil demand. And in that case, we see that there will be a doubling from 170 to 340 kiloton of oil equivalent in this country. Okay, so this is a first very good information. We have built a super simplified model that answers to the question, how much oil will be demanded by cars in the countries in 10 years. So you've seen we've been step by step. This was demand. Now let's look at how to supply and satisfy this demand. So we are in a country where there are some refineries. We were given the level of oil products produced by those refineries, but we will assume that the refinery output will increase, maybe because there will be new refineries in the countries or new subunits in one refinery or process improvements. So we assume that on average refineries will produce 2% more every year. And and as we will know what will be the domestic production of oil demand, and as we know what the level of oil demanded, we will be able to deduct how much gasoline needs to be imported, because all that is not produced in the local refineries needs to be imported to match the demand. And based on that, we can deduct a very simplified import dependency ratio, which is a part of the oil consumed in the country that is imported. And in that case, we will see that it used to be 50% and it's growing to 70%. So that's the results of our model with our assumptions. But as you have noticed, usually when we make assumptions, we were using this C column and putting the parameter here so that we can see easily what would be the impact of such parameters on our end result. And here we have put some graphs to illustrate what we've been looking at. So on the first one, you can see how our passenger kilometer, variable increases, and then how oil demand rises too. You can see below a zoom on how the oil demand is increasing, and looking at the right axis, how the efficiency is improving. So how the average fuel consumption per car is slowly decreasing. But the latest figure might be the more interesting, for example, to show to a policymaker or to whoever asks you to do this exercise, because you can see, okay, look, this red line this yellow line is the level of gasoline that we import to match the demand for oil. Based on our assumptions, we expect it to rise or to double by 2030. And as a result, our level of dependency to imports, will go from 50% to 70% in just 10 years. So then you can play with the parameters, saying, okay, if we want to import less, or if we want to reduce this import dependency, maybe we can play on the level of performance of the cars. And if we try cars to be more and more efficient, and if we aim to have not a 1% annual improvement of efficiency, but let's say a 3% of oil efficiency at the cars levels, and if our domestic refineries grow faster, and instead of growing by 2% per year, they grow by 4% per year, then we can see very quickly on our figure that even if we import more gasoline, we limit the growth, and the import dependency would remain stable at 50%. So I'm stopping here and welcoming all your questions, but this was just a very simplified illustration of what a short model can do. Okay, so I'm very happy to give the floor to anyone who would have questions. You can write them down. You can raise your hand. Really, it's we have 15 minutes to chat if you have any points to raise or any question. So excellent. We have again Mr. Aminu Haruna, who raised his hand. I think you
Yeah,
should be
thank you.
able to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, I can speak. Thank you, Arnold. From determining the oil used for transportation, the fuel, I mean, here in Nigeria, it's a little bit complex to determine the actual quantity of the fuel used because I believe the statistics of the fuel will be obtained from the companies selling the fuel, or we get the aggregate fuel quantity used for transportation, basically assuming for a year. In Nigeria, most of this fuel obtained or being sold for transportation, a large percentage of it goes for electricity generation as captive generation. So determining that factor is quite critical. How to determine the actual fuel that is consumed for transportation. Thank you.
No, thanks to you. It's indeed a structuring starting point, and that relates to statistics. How do you develop a very clear understanding of the situation today? Because as you said, if you cannot differentiate today the level of oil, which is just for transport, from what is used for power generation, then it's very hard to build some models. So as you may have discussed with my colleague Zakia, there are different sources to get your data. For oil, I would expect Ministry of Transport maybe to have some data on the level of gasoline which is consumed in the countries, maybe broken down by category, looking at the fuel stations in the country, or looking at the downstream distribution companies who could make some reporting on their activity. Then it depends on how the sector is regulated in Nigeria, but maybe for any liter of gasoline which is sold, there are some taxes on them, and maybe a Ministry of Finance and Budget could have some visibility on how much gasoline is sold for the transport. Then maybe some surveys have been conducted to try to better differentiate if someone is going to a fuel station and filling in his car, but also some jerrycan. We don't know if this will be used in a car or in a diesel generator. But here, a survey conducted to several households, businesses, could be a way to try to estimate them. But I'm sorry, I don't have a perfect and comprehensive answer. I think it's always relating to what can you do to improve the understanding of the statistics, to collect more, or to look to other stakeholders in the country who might have some data that will help you understand what you need. And I see we also have Mr. Ibrahim Sulu who raised his hand. Mr. Ibrahim, please go ahead if you can speak. Yeah, Mr. Ibrahim Sulu, are you able to speak? Okay, while Mr. Sulu might try to activate his mic, I have questions on what the practical application for energy modeling can be, and can similar components be applied to electricity industry. So on Friday, we'll discuss specifically the power sector, and here indeed we'll again try to understand historical data to see how much electricity was demanded by the population. And electricity is used for industry, electricity is used for services, for the residential sector at household level, but also at businesses. So, and electricity is used for powering appliances, for meeting many different needs. Electricity is central to our lives. So we'll try to disaggregate and to understand really all the needs for electricity. So getting a good view of demand. And based on that, we can very practically provide insights on to policymakers on what should be the development of the power sector, how much new plants needs to be built in the country, how much electricity can be exported to neighbors or should be imported from neighbors. So I think these are some practical application, and it will also have consequences for all the players using electricity. Then I have a question on the exercise. Can we see the detailed mathematical display of the calculation? So I can come back to the and share again the Excel. Maybe I see it's Friday Ona asking this question. If you can specify, please, if there is one question for which you would like to see the calculation, or if it's yeah, if you can just specify that, and then I will go to the Excel. Then excellent question from Mr. Emmanuel Humo on this example of oil and fuel. So the question is, how about the quality of fuel taken out the country illegally? How do we capture that in the modeling? So indeed, we all know there are some very complex challenges in many countries, and I think in Nigeria too, on getting all the right numbers related to oil production or refinery activity or distribution and sales due to illegal exports or illegal refining and direct use. So this is again a question on the way you are able to capture statistics and to understand the situation in the country. You can make estimation. For example, in our model, we could assume that once we have done on the predictions on demand, think, okay, we estimate that people will want to travel that much, that many kilometers, that there will be that many cars on the road, that cars on average consume 10 liters per kilometer. Once we moved to the question 5, which was assuming that all the demand for these oil products will be met by what we know as the refinery capacities and the imports, maybe here we can add some assumptions saying that, okay, maybe 10% of the demand for oil will be met by illegal imports to the country, or we can say that looking the opposite way, we expect the refineries of the countries to produce that many million tons of oil equivalent, and there will be maybe 1, 2, 3% that we expect to be exported illegally out of the country. So this is not something we can include in the quantities that will match and supply our demand. So there are always ways to add some estimation. The thing is to explain clearly why we do that and to be transparent on our calculation. Illegal exports, by essence, it's not easy to get numbers on the level, but whatever you can find, you can try to put that in the model, and you can always make sensitivity analysis. If you bring, for example, to the policymaker or to the people who ask you this exercise, you can say, this is my result, assuming that 1% of the oil produced in refineries are illegally exported. If illegal exports go up to 3%, this is how my result will look like. So there is always a way to take into consideration those assumptions. Okay, just looking if anyone else wanted to take the floor and speak, we still have time for that. Mr. Ibrahim Sulu, are you able to speak? So there is another question on the on this tool that was presented to you, and so for the calculation, I think you would be able to access this Excel file. So you have one sheet with questions only and one which is named solution, where you can see how the formula are making the calculation, multiplying parameter A by B by C, dividing by 1000 to get the right unit. So I let you look at that and ask questions if there are some calculation and formulas that you don't understand. One question which is very interesting is this tool flexible enough for a user to define a parameter apart from the parameters which are currently inbuilt? So it's an Excel exercise. This is again is to show you what can be done very quickly on Excel. This kind of thing I don't think is useful for you for Nigeria. It's too much simplified. But of course, you could add more parameters. As we mentioned, you could add one parameter and then update your formula. If we wanted to say that 2% of refinery outputs are illegally exported, then we would just add one line and ensure that when we calculate how much gasoline needs to be imported to supply demand in addition to what is produced by refineries, we just sum all that needs to be summed. But then it's what we could do also is to take this kind of model, but at a more disaggregated level, saying, okay, now we will have one Excel sheet for gasoline and one for diesel or for another oil product, or saying that we will have one Excel sheet for cars, one for 2 and 3 wheelers, one for buses, one for trucks, and then we would aggregate and consolidate all that to have a broader perspective. So of course, it's just a way of playing a bit with Excel, but this is not, I would not say it's really a tool. It's more a very small illustrating Excel exercise. But if it's useful for you to play with it, of course, feel free. And if we can assist you, we would be very happy to help you with building a more detailed model with more parameters. Okay, I see we are running out of time. An excellent question, and this will be the last one if that works for you, from Chidima Aruko Ben, who says, since any model is as good as the assumptions, what are the necessary measures or steps in building assumptions for energy modeling? So I would like to really indeed conclude on that. A model would be as good as its assumptions and as its input data. So it's not the truth. It's not the only way. It's depending on what you put in. Steps and measures to build assumptions can be done in a relevant way when looking at what happened in other countries, in other regions with similar features, assumptions which would be based on surveys, on research and academic work, which will be based on common sense, of course. So, but I would say that the main point is to ensure that your assumptions are transparent and presented as assumptions, because if you do some modeling exercise and you say, okay, this is the result and this is what will happen, but you don't give you don't enable your counterpart to understand how you've built this model and what assumptions you have taken, you will not be able to have a constructive discussion. Whereas if you say, based on this is that, this is where we would go, you would be able to discuss if your assumptions were too conservative, too optimistic, pessimistic, and to refine and to have interesting, I think, dialogue on your model. And one last question I'll take, and then I close. Can energy models be used to compare between technologies like nuclear and solar PV in terms of sustainability? So if we look just at the power sector, we will again discuss that on Friday. All the technologies are not directly comparable, but of course, a model that will aim to understand what the demand for electricity is and what the technologies which can generate electricity are, then we can, of course, thanks to a model, try to see in the future how much solar PV could be deployed in a country, when solar PV could be used and what type of needs it would match. What do we need as flexibility sources? What do we need as baseload sources? It can be nuclear, it can be hydropower, it can be fossil fuel technologies. So of course, a model will be an excellent tool to understand, based on cost, based on electricity generation profile, how to make a mix of electricity sources. That being said, I really want to thank you very much for your attention today. We will post on the video on the YouTube channel the video of today, and all the material is available on the Google Drive link you have. If you're missing those links, please reach out to us. And then I wish you a very nice Eid al-Adha holiday. I wish you safe travel if you move to in the country to see relatives and families, and really hope you will enjoy those days. And I will be very happy to see you again on Thursday to look more at the demand for energy. We'll take the example of building, but it could have been industry or transport. And here the idea will really be to try to understand how much energy will be needed in one sector if we think very hard. What do people want? What services? Is it about having more lights in their places, about cooking more, and really to make the good calculation to have projections on that. So thanks to all of you. I wish you a very good day, and see you on Thursday. Bye bye.